I would now like to invite up Nicole Seymour. Nicole Seymour published with Darren DeWitt, Satirical Liberals and Superior Conservatives, The Asymmetry of U.S. Political Humor. It appeared in the Oxford Handbook of Screen Comedians. Okay, yeah, I'm like, I cut that off. Screen comedy this year in 2025. Oh, she brought it. It's beautiful. All right. So there's your microphone. It should be on. Is it on? Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Just finishing my donut. Okay, yes, I'm ready.
All right, let's start with some introductions. Like, what is your field of study in general?
Yeah, so I'm in the English department. I work on contemporary literature and media. And specifically, I look at environmental studies, queer studies, and humor studies, which sounds like a lot, but that means I'm basically reading contemporary literature through one or more of those lenses at a given time.
And in this particular chapter, what are you doing?
So we're trying to do two things. We're trying to answer two questions. The first is what's the difference between liberal comedy and conservative comedy, broadly construed? And the second question is, why have scholars not paid attention to conservative comedy historically? Why has that been understudied?
And how does one study that? What's your method?
So a couple different things. So we did a huge review of the literature. I think our article is 12 pages, and then we have 10 pages of citations. So we tried to look at everything that's ever been written about liberal comedy, everything that's been written about conservative comedy by scholars. Turns out, again, not so much has been written about the conservative comedy, but a lot has been written about liberal comedy. And then we kind of broke things down because my co-author is a political scientist, and so his expertise is thinking about political ideology. So if, for example, conservatives don't like big government, how do we see that represented in their forms of comedy? So he was on the ideological bent of things, and I was on the more analytical bent of things. So I watched a lot of Sarah Palin videos, remember her, and a lot of Donald Trump videos, remember him. And so my job was to do rhetorical and visual analyses of those things. So, when they were making jokes, like was the comedy coming or the humor coming from verbal things? Was it coming from visual cues, like gestures they were making, faces they were making, props they were using? So I was kind of on the ground in terms of what is actually happening in these comedy moments.
Oh, wow. And that process of, because I think some people in the audience are from these solo authored fields, or maybe students have only written papers by themselves. What was that process like writing with someone?
He's my best friend, so it works pretty well. So yeah, we kind of divvied up the labor pretty easily, and it's just an excuse to work together. Honestly, that's what academics do. Is they just eventually find ways to work with their friends, or go to conferences with their friends. Don't tell anyone. That's a secret. Okay.
And what a perfect pairing, a political scientist and then your skills too. Before we launch into some of your main arguments, I want to get some definitions out there, right? What is satirical comedy? What's satire?
Yeah, so satire is usually the exaggeration of an existing reality in order to make a social or political critique. And probably the most famous one from literature is Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Has anyone had to read? Okay, yeah. So it's from 1729, and he proposes that poor Irish people should sell their children to rich English people to eat for food. Obviously, that is ridiculous, right? But so he's presenting something that's like totally outlandish, totally over the top, in order to make a really grounded point, actually, which is that English colonial oppression is bad, and that we should have sympathy for impoverished Irish people. So yeah, just kind of going over the top in order to make a realistic point, actually.
And then some other forms of comedy that you're looking at are like punching down comedy, trolling. What are those?
Yeah, so punching down is basically sort of taking aim at people that are perceived to have less power than you. So a famous recent example would be Trump. I don't know if anyone remembers this, mocking a physically disabled reporter in a press conference. Trolling is a little more complicated, but I actually thought of a recent example that happened on campus. I don't know if anyone was around for this, but there was flyers that were being posted around campus a few years ago that said, "It's okay to be white." Mm-hmm. And the idea there was to kind of elicit a reaction, to get people to sort of either have to say, to put them in this position of having to say, well, it's not okay to be white, or to say it is okay to be white, but what does that actually mean? Turns out, surprise, there is a group of white supremacists behind this campaign. But the point was not to really do anything concrete or valuable politically. It was just to rile people up, right? You probably also heard the phrase "own the libs," right? Just to see people get worked up, to kind of waste their time by just creating havoc. And there's a great quotation from this computer programmer who says, "A troll is a time thief." So it's this idea, again, you're not doing anything substantial, you're just creating chaos, you're just wasting people's time.
So now let's get into the argument. So you're analyzing comedy, you have these major forms of comedy, and what do you find as you look at conservative and liberal comedic forms?
Yeah, so we did try to talk about that there are these differences between conservative and liberal comedy, and liberals tend to like satire and conservatives tend to like these other forms that we just talked about. And then also we have that meta component where we're talking about why aren't people studying conservative comedy? And one of the arguments there is just that scholars haven't recognized this asymmetry. So for example, scholars recognize that there's this very long tradition of liberal satire. So then they go looking for it on the conservative side, and then they don't find it. And then they say things like conservatives just aren't funny, which is very simplistic. But there was actually a headline that said, that we looked at for this article, liberals like to laugh, conservatives not so much, which just seems like, could that possibly be true? Like humor is this universal thing, right? So we're basically saying that humor scholars are just looking for the thing that they like, or the thing that they assume counts as comedy. They're not seeing it, and then they're like, guess there's no conservative comedy, which is very much not true. And I think you have some questions about that.
Yeah. And just to, because I think you do have, as you analyze the literature, you have some theories about why conservative comedy hasn't been studied as much. So let's talk a little more about that.
Yeah. So that again, the first part of it is like this, when that phrase, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you love satire and you're looking for comedy, like you're only looking for satire. So there's just that kind of implicit bias of what we think comedy, or what certain scholars think comedy is. The other thing is a little more complicated and ideological, which is that a lot of scholars just don't want to have to touch some of the very far right, disturbing comedy. Like people don't want to sit down and watch hours of racist comedy, for example. That's unpleasant. And there's a book I brought, just a little show and tell, by these other scholars. It's one of the few examples of people actually studying conservative humor. And it says, "That's not funny, how the right makes comedy work for them." Sinkowitz and Marx are the authors. And the reason they chose that title is when they would tell their colleagues, like, here's examples of what we're studying. Like, here's an example of a joke I'm looking at. And their colleagues would say, "That's not funny," because they found it offensive or whatever. So there's this sort of assumption of, if I don't find it funny, no one else possibly could find it funny, which unfortunately or fortunately is not true, right? So there's just this bias. And I think we could be, depending on our viewpoint, I think we could be sympathetic and say, well, I understand why people don't want to touch, a racist joke. Like they just don't want to go there. They don't want to spend their time analyzing that. But they do exist. So we have to recognize that.
And, in politics and in general, what role does humor play, and how has this changed over time?
I think it's really changed over the last couple of years. I think we've seen that humor, especially crude humor, offensive humor, is effective. So again, I keep coming back to our famous example of Donald Trump, but 20 years ago, we would not have seen a politician, making jokes, again, mocking disabled people, talking about women's bodies being disgusting. That's not something that people would have thought was going to work. And it seems like it is working, at least for one person. And I just think overall, we're seeing comedy permeating, multiple realms. I think that for better or worse, comedy is becoming kind of like a lingua franca, like a language that people need to be able to speak.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, though, is it just because people haven't studied it, right? Like, so I think like since you are studying it, are there earlier forms where we did see this type of punching down work in politics? So I had the pleasure of talking about this article with, where's Gabriela Nunez? Gabriela and I got to talk about this, and we started talking about blackface and minstrel shows. right, as an earlier form. Can you,
Yeah. So that's a really good point that, it's not like racist humor has never existed, for example. And in fact, some people would say it's kind of foundational to American life. But I think there's a couple things that we're seeing. One is that there was a time when, a politically correct time. Imagine it. There was a time a few years ago where people were like, we don't do that stuff anymore. And then I think there's been a huge backlash to that. That again, we're seeing right now. I also think that there's so much that's changed in the media landscape, and that's something we talk about in the article as well, that we have incredible polarization, siloing, specialization. There is what started with cable TV in the 80s, 90s, I guess. There's a cable channel if you like knitting. There is a cable channel if you like country music, right? So very niche audiences were being served. Then we also get the rise of the podcasts. Of course, podcasts are huge in the conservative sphere. So there's just been a proliferation of spaces where conservative humor can flourish. And I think what's happening is, yes, those spaces are understudied, but also because we're so polarized, some people just don't even know they exist at all. So I always give the example of, I can do it with this audience. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Greg Gutfeld. Okay. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Stephen Colbert. Okay, more people have heard of Stephen Colbert, but Greg Gutfeld regularly outperforms him in ratings and has for many years. Greg Gutfeld is on Fox News. So people are sort of, self-selecting. The algorithm is selecting what they're seeing. And so it's not just that scholars aren't paying attention. Like, a lot of us don't even know that this is existing, but it's flourishing. It's making millions of dollars, and it's out there. We just don't know.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot more work needs to be done in this area. What future studies do you hope this sparks?
So in our conclusion, we call for more empirical studies on conservative humor. So we want to know, again, I'm sort of, we have this hypothesis that I just mentioned that, humor is effective on the right. So humor arguably helped Donald Trump get elected. We don't have a lot of concrete proof of that, right? We have proof of concept, I suppose. But there hasn't been research that actually asks people, like, how do you respond to his jokes? Or why were those jokes successful? What are they doing for you? So definitely that's an area that just needs a lot more research.
Yeah, great. Since this article came out, something big had happened in the humor comedian world, and that is Jimmy Kimmel was suspended by network TV for comments he made after Charlie Kirk's murder, right? So what does that tell us about the state of humor in politics?
Yeah, I think it just shows how powerful and consequential it is, that humor does have this role to play in making political commentary, and it is getting under people's skin for, better and worse. And I think, I think it's great news for comedians. I think it's terrible news for comedians, right? That people are paying attention, and this does have an impact. This is sort of one of the ways, we've known this for a while, but it's, particularly painfully clear right now that comedy is one of the ways in which political information is being disseminated, and it's getting to the highest levels, right? It's penetrating the highest levels.
Yeah. What else are you working on right now?
So Darren, my co-author, and I were working on an edited volume called Conservative Camp. So camp is in campiness, kitschiness, not like going camping. And we're really interested in this idea that camp is something that's been associated with the left for a long time and with queer communities, but is kind of migrating to the right. So the example we always give is that Donald Trump danced to, what's it called? YMCA. Thank you. I was like, was it Macho Man or YMCA? Okay. So YMCA is this huge gay anthem. Why is Donald Trump dancing to it at his rallies? What is happening? This is a song we're used to seeing at pride parades in gay bars, right? So that's just one little example, but we have these contributors that are finding many examples of camp being this thing that we've kind of associated with the left, but it's not actually tied to the left, and it's kind of migrating. So the other example we give is like the QAnon shaman. If you remember, your favorite insurrectionist from January 16th was, just dressed out, wearing this kind of Viking hat, no shirt, face paint. So just these really gaudy sort of outsized personalities that we kind of associate again with like queer or like playful, stuff that we're really seeing a lot on the right today. So,
any recommendations for other books we can read, podcasts, things we can watch?
Yes, I definitely recommend. I'm not getting any kickback for this, but that's not funny, that I mentioned before. There's also a really good book called The Souls of White Jokes by Raul Perez. And I wrote down I always forget subtitles. Subtitle is How Racist Humor Fuels White Supremacy, and that's from Stanford Press. And he's actually organizing an online conference tomorrow on humor and the right. So if you're interested in that, you can grab me, or you could just Google. Actually, the organization is called Critical Humor Studies, and this is a really new organization that I think is kind of taking up some of this work that we're talking about. So,
Thank you so much, Dr. Seymour. Can't wait to have you back.